Support for this podcast comes from the law firm of Davis Malm. Whether you're a developer, property owner, manager, or commercial tenant, their real estate attorneys know the lay of the land, not just the law. Learn more at davismalm.com.
WBUR Podcasts, Boston.
I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and you're listening to The Common. Max Larkin, welcome to The Common.
Happy to be here.
So, Max, you're a WBUR education reporter, and I want to start this off by asking you a question. What is the MCAS?
The MCAS is like this big juggernaut annual assessment offered every spring, grades 3 to 8, and then again in 10th grade in public schools in Massachusetts. Stands for the Massachusetts Comprehensive Assessment System. And it's kind of used as the rubric or the yardstick for how both students and schools are performing in English and math and science, technology, and engineering.
Mm-hmm. And you have a story that looks at a group of schools in the state who are trying to take a different approach because there's some concerns about the accessibility of this test. Am I right?
That's right. Yeah. All groups don't do exactly the same on the MCAS. So lower income towns, and in particular, English learners tend to struggle on the test. So the question is this a test that is showing really what all students can do, or does it have a kind of bias baked in so that it ends up just kind of tracking really closely to demographic data? Is it giving us a clear, real picture of what students know and can do?
Got it. Now, Max, I want to put a pin in that because I want you to walk us through what it's like to take the MCAS.
I think it feels like a particular kind of high-stress school day, Daryl. So up till 6 years ago or so, it would have been bring in your sharpened number 2 pencils and fill in a Scantron and maybe write some short responses. Today, it's offered digitally, but a few things remain the same, right? All the helpful posters and stuff come down off the wall. The room is silent. You're in your homeroom. One student to the bathroom at a time. The test is offered in English, whether it be a test of English, math, or science. You're doing some thinking, but at the same time, it's not thinking like you and I would do in an office. It's this kind of solitary, silent, English only, applied attention, and you're trying with some pressure on you to show what you've learned over the course of the last year.
And what are some of the more specific criticisms about testing this way?
There's a lot of criticisms. The test has a lot of detractors, I think, particularly among teachers' unions, educators, certain class of public education advocate who say, first, that it doesn't really look like the world that you and I live in as adults, Daryl. Like, how many times are we asked to, perform this kind of high stakes educational demonstration? Doesn't come up that much. And so there are people who say this test isn't really a good indicator of like the career skills, the interpersonal skills, soft skills, research skills that we need to thrive in the workforce and in college. And then there's an equity angle too. There are people who say, listen, one of the fastest growing demographics in this state is English learners, people who, maybe come to the United States halfway through their childhood and are being asked to take a test in English like a year after they've arrived in the United States. And people would say, and I think there's some justice to it, that it's not surprising that they struggle. Like, I spoke to Caridad Lopez, who is the principal of the Stacy Middle School in Milford. And she said, think about being in that situation.
Even if they've been learning English for a couple of years, taking a test that looks the same for everyone and uses vocabulary that might not be familiar to everyone, it is a little difficult.
is generally the finding, Daryl, of academic linguists and education experts that it takes like 5 to 7 years to learn academic English. It takes 3 to 5 years to learn spoken English. So being asked to take a test in English a year after you've arrived, it being a little difficult, is an understatement. And at Caridad Lopez's school last year, 3 to 5% of their English learners passed the MCAS.
Eesh. And Max, to get a sense of the stakes, what happens if a school student doesn't pass the MCAS? If you have that kind of failure rate?
Yeah. So there are two different ways in which the test is so-called high stakes. So it's high stakes for a student in the 10th grade. If you don't pass that test, you really limit your ability to graduate from high school. So a lot of students will retake it sometimes 4 or 5 times. And then a district that is posting low scores for a long time kind of, as you might imagine, attracts the wrong kind of attention from state education officials. And under state law, those state education officials can actually take over a district that's chronically underperforming on the MCAS. And they've done that in 3 towns and cities, Lawrence, Holyoke, and Southbridge. And all of them, Daryl, are majority Latino.
I don't have kids, right? So I'm not directly connected to the state schools. This MCAS thing is somewhat foreign to me, right? Can you talk about the broader implications of this MCAS test?
Well, it's like I said, Daryl. I mean, if you have a bunch of people, particularly from low-income, largely immigrant communities who are struggling to pass this test, you've kind of recreated an inequality that was already there. It's one thing to use a test in a diagnostic way, right, to get a picture of where everybody's at. But right now we're using it in a somewhat punitive way where there are some communities where the passage rate is much lower and those people have to kind of put their lives on hold. I think that has broader ramifications for the economy and for the society of the state.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back.
Did you kill Marlene Johnson?
I think you're one of the first people to have actually asked.
From WBUR and ZSP Media, this is Beyond All Repair, a new podcast about an unsolved murder that will leave you questioning everything.
Somebody should be in jail for murdering my sister.
A woman who's never been believed.
As long as they think I have done this, then they're not looking for who actually did this.
And that's what makes it a cold case.
No, it's a botched case.
And a search for the truth, once and for all.
Wow, it just gets more interesting.
Beyond All Repair. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
Be careful. You're digging in a place that's been very peaceful for a while.
Do it anyway. Dig.
And we're back. Max, you have been reporting on a group of schools who are taking a different approach to this type of testing. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I went down to Milford, which is sort of in central Mass, not that far from the Rhode Island border. And that's a town where they're seeing this kind of demographic change, where the English learner population has like tripled in less than a decade. That puts a lot of strain on the schools when it comes to the MCAS. Like I spoke to Assistant Superintendent Craig Consigli, who kind of compared and contrasted 2 different kinds of tests. So he's going to talk about the MCAS, and then he's going to talk about performance assessment, which I'll explain.
Learning is a very social endeavor. You learn from other people. You learn from making mistakes. A concern that I've always had with MCAS is kids don't always know where they're making mistakes, so it's hard for them to learn from it and grow. Where in a performance assessment, you're getting feedback in the moment from a teacher, but you're also getting written feedback afterwards. And there are opportunities to make corrections and make whatever it is that you're working on better.
So in Craig Consigli's framework, the MCAS is a test of learning. It's a test of what you know. And these things called performance assessments, which are almost the opposite of the MCAS, they're tests for learning. So you're learning while the test is going on. And the way that they work, Daryl, is you're given a task, not some highly guided, highly restrictive set of multiple choice questions, but a kind of challenge that you do in a group. You can switch between Spanish and English if that's your inclination. You can ask teachers for help. You can consult notes and resources. And basically, you do something and show what you know that way. And the hope is that more students can kind of, A, enjoy that, but B, that it's welcoming in a way that pretty strict MCAS is not.
Okay, so these schools are trying this new approach via performance assessments. Walk me through that. What does that look like for students?
Having watched a few of them over the years, Daryl, it's like almost the opposite of the MCAS. So often students are sorted into groups. I think typically they're sorted into groups and they're given a kind of challenge. So it's like, design your dream home and use geometry to figure out, how big each room is, what you can fit. Maybe you're given a budget or you're given 4 beakers full of clear liquids for a science assessment. And it's like, how do you figure out what each one is? You're given the tools that you need, test strips and different compounds that you can mix them with. And you can kind of talk it over both with your teacher and with your classmates. And say you're in Milford, you'll hear Spanish in that room or Portuguese in that room because not only is the test not offered in English only, but you might group foreign language speaking students together so that they've got a chance to think it through in a way that's comfortable to them. So, where the MCAS is silent, these are kind of noisy. Where the MCAS is solitary, these are collaborative. And their supporters say, these performance assessments not only are more inclusive, but they're a lot more like the real world outside of school. You're given a kind of problem and a bunch of different ways to solve it.
Now, Max, this sounds fun, right? And engaging, but nothing is perfect. So what kind of challenges does this new approach pose?
I think there are a couple of challenges. One is that it takes a while to retrain teachers. It takes a while to design these assessments. And that's what this consortium is trying to do. With a little bit of state funding, they give professional development, basically training teachers in this new approach. But it does take time. And it's only 8 communities, including Boston, Milford, we've mentioned, Winchester. And then I think the bigger challenge is that there are a lot of people who want a number, an exact score that says, hey, this student is sort of 5% or 10% or 15% behind the state average, and they might need a little extra support. The MCAS is really good at generating that number. Performance assessments, by contrast, there's a lot of room for subjectivity.
So it sounds like it's just going to require a complete reframing of how we think about testing. But, the MCAS is only 25 years old. What would it take for their approach to replace the MCAS?
Well, I think it would take one big change, which is a fundamental change in state and I think federal law. I mean, you could have some performance assessments, but the feds do expect some diagnostic standardized testing even under more progressive federal education law. But I think bigger than that, there's a change of attitude. I mean, I think what it would take is a real top-level frustration with what the MCAS has done to and for the state. Generally, the districts that were underperforming 25 years ago are still the districts that are underperforming now. They're urban, they're low income. They got a lot of immigrants and English learners. And Maura Healey, when she ran for governor, said, hey, I like what this consortium is doing, and I want to look at ways we could change the MCAS. So I think there is this idea that the MCAS should evolve, that maybe it should be offered in multiple languages. So there is an appetite for the MCAS to evolve, but I think it would take yet another step to go fully away from this kind of high-stakes sit-down test and really embrace a world of performance assessments.
Max, this was very interesting. Thank you so much for coming through to The Common.
Thanks for having me.
That's WBUR education reporter Max Larkin. And that's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening to The Common. If you have any thoughts on the MCAS, standardized testing, performance assessments, whatever it may be, hit us up on Instagram at WBUR The Common, or send us an email at thecommon@wbur.org. I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.